I start by cutting the PVC to rough length. Quick note here, I'm using 480 PSI. It has a thicker sidewall. The very first one that I made was, I think it's 200 PSI. The sidewall is a lot thinner. And it actually played in tune through 2 octaves without having a Fajardo wedge. So that's maybe something to look into for the future. But Doug Tipple's original instructions call for the overall length to be 575 millimeters, if I recall correctly. But that was also with a very small 3/8 round embouchure hole, and I'm using a larger oval hole. He later recommended using a larger oval instead of a small 3/8 round hole. So a larger embouchure hole means a longer flute. So this is 600 millimeters, and then I will cut it down as I fine tune it. I like to use a metal chop saw because I can get a good, perfectly clean cut every time. And this is a metal blade, so I can use it to deburr the PVC as well. Whenever I'm laying out all the holes and everything, I like to put my new flute next to one of the previous models just to kind of QC what I'm doing. So Doug Tipple's measurements for all of the holes, they're from the open end of the flute down here, and he calls for 525 millimeters. But again, that was with that smaller 3/8 hole. I don't do it that way. I'm just measuring from this end. This is not super critical because I've got extra length. Measuring all of my old flutes, it's around like 1.75, 1.8, somewhere in there. I like having it nice and short here because I like to open up this end, and I get in there with sandpaper and stuff and super glue and stuff. So I like to be able to service the inside of this part right up in here, right underneath the embouchure hole. So I like to keep this nice and short, although it doesn't look as good as if you left a longer portion over here. Using a drill press gives you way cleaner holes than if you just use a drill and freehand it. The very first one that I did, I just freehanded it with a drill, and actually I did that for 2 of them. And the holes were just gnarly. PVC is really soft and it flexes as you're cutting it. So with the drill press, you can apply slow, even pressure. And then this little, I don't know what you'd call it, 2-axis clamp or something. This just helps me hold it in place. So I start with something smaller and I step my way up. And the ultimate size I'm going to drill is to 3/8, even though the hole will be bigger. After I drill to 3/8, I like to use other tools to create the finished embouchure hole. 3/8. Yes, I'm a redneck. Most of my projects over the last 10 years have been done on the tailgate of my various trucks that I've owned. So welcome to my workshop. So for the embouchure hole, the 3/8 round hole I found was not, it didn't sound as good as a larger oval hole. I tried both, and I've played around with different sizes of ovals, and what I have found, to me, that sounds the best is an oval that is 0.480, that's 480 thousandths on the narrow side, and then a 1/2 inch or 500 thousandths across the long side. And I'm using a vernier caliper to measure that. I'm using a rotary tool primarily, but I turn it way down because this is just a stone, a grinding stone. Definitely don't want to use something like a carbide burr. That would tear it up way too quick. But even this thing will make really quick changes. So I keep the speed low. Check it often to make sure I'm not getting too big. The vernier caliper. Nowhere near the size yet. So, one thing I forgot to mention, I probably should include this. Whenever you're in here with the grinder and you're working that inside angle, you got to be careful not to punch the, try to get in the light there, not to punch the tool down so deep that you're gouging the wall underneath the inside of the flute there. If you gouge this in here, when the air comes in, at least in my understanding, the air comes in and it hits that and it creates turbulence and just messy airstream. So you want to leave this as smooth and clean as possible. I'd try to make sure that the inside, everywhere that the air comes in and hits within the first little distance here, is really smooth and clean. I think that makes a good difference. All right, so I've got, on the long axis, I've got 480 thousandths about right now. So I'm within 20 thousandths. And then on the short side, I'm currently at about 400. So I'm gonna stop using the rotary tool and I'm gonna switch over to sandpaper because it's way easier to control. So I got a couple different things I'm using. This is a cartridge roll for like a die grinder, and it's the smallest diameter is almost the perfect size to go in there. And because it's so close to the size, it produces a nice round, even grind. And then I also use just some rolled up 100 grit sandpaper. This part is time consuming, but the embouchure is really important. So I try to take my time and do a good job on the embouchure. Another thing too, as you're blowing on the flute and as the airstream hits this leading edge, you want an undercut on that blowing edge. The sharper that edge, the more air it requires, but the more volume you get and the more responsive the flute is. So I kind of lean the sandpaper under there, or I also use files. I've got a couple little hand files that I will file an undercut on there. I'm getting pretty close. As you're working the inside of this hole, you'll be kind of melting and mushrooming up the plastic here on the edge, the top edge of the hole. So if you wanted a perfect, clean plastic PVC finish, you wouldn't want to do this, but I don't do that. I sand all of the PVC anyway. So you will need to deburr the top of the edge there. So. Oh, for deburring, I don't use 100. 100 grit would be way too coarse. So this is like some worn out 220. But so that's almost a 500. And then the short axis is, the short length is 465-ish, 462. So we're really close. 478, that's close enough. And 509 that way. So let me plug this thing and see how it sounds. For the plug, most people use cork, and I would too if I had some. I didn't have any cork handy, so this is a 3/4 inch dowel, and I have wrapped it up with electrical tape. That's a pretty redneck way of doing it, but it works. So all of the plugs are short, like they're recessed into the body of the flute, but I have to drive them out from the inside. So if I leave a longer handle for now, I can still just pull it back out in order to service the inside of the flute. So let's see how it sounds. Sounds okay. It probably needs some more work. There's a little bit of burr on the plastic. The cleaner and the smoother this hole is, the clearer the sound. So I'm going to take some finer grit sandpaper now and clean it up with something like 400. Sounding better than it did earlier.